Okay, so we're gonna go over these MCAT sample questions, which are right from the AAMC, which is definitely what you want to be looking for. And this passage is, so our strategy for Chem Phys, right, is to try to look at the questions first before we try to digest the whole passage, just because the questions can kind of guide us to what we should be looking at. And the CB passages in particular try to overwhelm you with information, and not all of it is really relevant. So this seems to show, some description about this reaction, and then we have another reaction. So it seems like it's pretty maybe orgo-based, and then we have some description of what's going on with the reactions, and then we have some graphs here. And what are these graphs about? Isotopic composition of compound 3 oxidation products using this compound here. And then we have stoichiometry. So it could be some Gen Chem. And then we look at this question. The first question is, the progress of reaction 2 can be monitored by observing what changed the IR spectrum of the product mixture. So we know we need to be looking at reaction 2, and we know we need to be thinking about IR spectrometry, right? So, and all these answer choices are talking about peaks. So we know we're definitely thinking about IR spectrum. And now we need to think about, what is the context of the passage that we should be looking at, right? So we haven't even read the passage yet. Let's just go back to the passage. Reaction 2. Okay, this is reaction 2. And so the above one is reaction 1, this is reaction 2. So what do we see in reaction 2? We see this compound 3 interacting with hydrogen peroxide and this thing called IDO. If you don't know what IDO is, so let's take a look at IDO. What is IDO? Okay, we see it here, right? The heme enzyme indoleamine 2,3-dioxygenase, IDO. So all we really need to understand from here is it's an enzyme, right? That's a key word, right? That tells, okay, before I had no idea what IDO was, now I know that IDO is an enzyme. This is very strong. This is very important to know, right? Catalyze reaction 1, first and rate determining step of L-tryptophan. Okay, that's very important to know in case there's like kinetic questions. Is an important enzyme of the human immune system. Okay, this stuff like important enzyme of the human immune system is probably like just fluff, right? All we need to know here was enzyme. That's why we want to look at the questions first to guide us. So now we go back to here and we want to look at this this reaction. So what do we see? We see compound 3 is interacting with this enzyme and with this peroxide, and then we're getting a bunch of different compounds, right? What is different about these compounds that can help us answer our question?
Well, you get like, oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were asking.
No, I was asking. I was just going to scroll down and say like, we were thinking about IR spectra, right? So what did you want to say?
You get a lot more like C double bond O groups.
For sure. You get some C, in fact, you have these novel carbonyl groups, right? Like before we didn't have these at all. Now we have them, right? So based on these options, right? Would that correspond to an appearance or a disappearance?
For sure an appearance.
For sure an appearance, right? Boom. We've eliminated 2 of our options already, right? This is exactly the kind of logical flow that you should be going through, right?
Yeah.
So now we have an appearance. And now this is the content check, right? Because these are the exact same choices, except it's a broad peak at 3,400 or a sharp peak at 1,750. Based on your critical thinking, you have narrowed this down to a 50-50, and your content will carry you to the right answer, or it's a guess. But with critical thinking alone, we were able to come down to a 50-50, right? And the content review part, right? It's like you either know it or you don't. If you know it, then you got it. If you don't know it, it's a guess, right? So what do we think it will be? Will it be a broad peak at 3,400 or a sharp peak at 17 to 1750?
So I think if it was an amino group that was being formed, you would get the broad peak at 34. But since it's the carbonyl groups, then I think it would be appearance of a sharp peak at 1,700.
I believe that is correct. Yes, I think that the carbonyl groups, all the carbonyl groups really show up at around 1,700 to 1,750. I think the 3,400, the broad thing,
Mhm.
I remember there's like a really nice, the one that I used to learn it, IR spectroscopy infographic. I still remember this all the way from when I actually took Orgo. It's this one, I think. Yes. And if I remember correctly, is it no, is it how do I view the image?
It was
Oh,
hydroxyl instead.
it's a hydroxyl, yes, because it
Uh,
looks like a tongue. And to me, I remember as like somebody like begging for alcohol. That because look, there's some like little images here. Wait, how do I need to see the image? Because the image, yes, here we go. Look. So it looks like a tongue. A smooth tongue means an alcohol, right?
oh.
And then if there's two fangs, it's a vampire, like a primary threat. That's how I remembered it. A primary, and vampires are mean. It's a primary amine.
Yeah.
And then if it's one fang, it's like a baby vampire. So it's a secondary amine.
Okay.
And then if it's like a big beard, actually, I never came up with a mnemonic for this one, but it's a carboxylic acid if it's a beard.
Can you share that picture, or what did you type in for it?
Yeah, I'll post the link in the chat right now. But yeah, I love the I found this like way back when I actually took Orgo in undergrad, and it was super helpful.
Cool.
Very,
Thank you.
very, yeah, not a problem. Yeah, like visual stuff like this is very good. If you search, I found like if you search for like infographic or something, like sometimes you get like really nice stuff like this. Okay, so, oh no, this is my stuff. Wait, where's the link? Oh, here it is. Okay, here we are. So, good. So the correct answer is C. Appearance of a shark peak at 1700 to 1750. Good. So even though your content knowledge wasn't perfect, you were still able to understand this, right? So don't.
Yeah.
So yeah. So awesome. So like when you are like feeling overwhelmed, just go through thinking critically, and then you'll find that only at the very end do you often need to like make a hard decision about like based on your discrete knowledge. So rationale, this question requires a test taker to et cetera, recognition of the presence of additional carbonyl groups, good. Lead the test taker to conclude the appearance of a peak between this, good, awesome. So next, the following kinetic parameters were obtained for the ideocatalyzed oxidation of compound 3 by hydrogen peroxidase or peroxide in the presence of L-trip. Do you know what L-trip means?
That's just tryptophan.
Tryptophan, yes. What does the
Yeah.
L here mean?
That's the designation, right? The um, relative configuration.
Yes. Yeah, good. It's either D-tryptophan or L-tryptophan, right?
Yes.
Which one do humans naturally have?
Humans have freak. Humans have D.
I think it's that we have D sugars and L amino acids.
D sugars and L amino acids. Okay.
Yes, I believe that's the case. Let me check. I'm not. It's been a while, but I'm not. I believe that's the case. I believe I have it written down somewhere.
And then I think it's like one amino acid that's reversed, right?
Yes,
like cysteine or
cysteine,
one of them maybe.
but that's for different. That's for Con-Ingold prelog. That's for RNS.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But this is like a different designation. Yeah. L amino acids. Maybe I'll find it. I'm not sure. Actually, if I search for glycine achiral, I'll probably find it. Yeah, my amino acids card. All naturally occurring amino acids are L, except glycine, which is achiral. Of the 19 L amino acids, all are S configuration except cysteine, which is R. So you got all your fun facts about amino acids right here.
Okay.
Yes, I believe that the sugar should definitely be D, as far as I remember. Yes, this wouldn't be L sugar; it would be D sugars. I believe I just believe that. I'm not gonna check anymore. Okay, so this is a human, and remember, if you didn't know, right? Like they gave you the fluff. They said an important enzyme for human immune system. So right there.
Oh, yeah. So if you don't know it, you can kind of just like figure that out from there too. Okay.
They often give you like they often give you like little hints, but you wouldn't like pick up on them unless you were thinking of it in that way.
Mhm.
So the following kinetic parameters were obtained for the ideocatalyzed oxidation of compound 3 by H2O2 in the presence of this enzyme, right? And we have this little chart here, right? Based on this data, what effect does L-trip have on the reaction? So the left side of the chart is showing us increasing concentrations in micromolar of L-trip, right? Increasing enzyme concentration. And then on this column, we have something called kcat, and the units are seconds, 1/seconds, right? And we see that it's going from high to low, right? Do you know what kcat is? Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, that's turnover number, right?
Turnover number. Okay, good. So if the turnover number is decreasing, which of these options seems to make sense? We have L-trip,
Definitely D.
definitely D, right?
I
So
think, yeah.
I think so as well. I think we have this is kind of like a throwaway because we see that there is an effect, right?
Yeah.
So that this is just wrong, right? And then we have some stuff about oxidation, right? But I think that this oxidation stuff is trying to trip you up if you didn't understand what L-trip was. But since it's an enzyme and they're talking about kinetic parameters, then we're like, oh, enzyme kinetics, right? So I think that definitely leads us to L-trip inhibits the enzyme, and it does. If you didn't know what kcat was, then again, we go to our handy dandy deck, and we'll search for kcat. And we've got here turnover, just like she said, catalytic turnover, kcat, which measures the reaction rate at high substrate concentrations directly proportional to Vmax, not to be confused with catalytic efficiency, which is kcat divided by Michaelis-Menten, which measures the reaction rate at low substrate concentrations. So, if you read this, if you saw this question and you're like, I've never heard of kcat, I need to learn about it, go to these cards and you figure it out, right? And you go to whatever resource you need. The other thing, I'm not sure if I showed you guys how to do this. If you use the cards, right? We have this particular card, but what if you want to see the cards around it, right? Then you go, once you've clicked on the card that you're on, right? Then you go to Dex and you just click Dex in the left side, right? If you click Dex, now it will show you all the cards, right, around that card. So if you just go up, you'll see all the other relevant cards, right? So we start here with KM, talking about KM, talking about Vmax, and you can get like a full understanding of everything around that concept, right? Competitive inhibition, non-competitive inhibition, uncompetitive mixing, blah, 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 blah. There's a bunch of stuff, right? And then here we're moving on to cellular respiration. So that's it. Nothing more. All the kinetics cards are right here. Okay, so good. All right, let's look at the last one. So which experiment can be used to show that compound 6 is not formed sequentially from either compound 4 or compound 5? So again, let's go up. Compound 6 is not formed sequentially from compound 4 or compound 5. So here we have compound 6 and compound 4 and compound 5. And the question is asking, what can we do to show that compound 6 isn't coming as a byproduct of 4 and 5? That compound 6 is actually the result of enzymatic action on compound 3, right? That's a good question, right? That's the kind of question that, like, if you did this research and you told your PI, right, hey, look, I figured out that this thing creates these 3 products, they might say, well, how do you know that? How do you know that compound 6 isn't just coming from 4 and 5 as like a after effect, right? Okay, good question. How do we solve that? So we see 4 different options. And this is a very, very conceptual question, right? We can A, conduct the reaction of compound 4 with compound 5 and identify the products, okay? What would happen if we did this? If we did this, what would we be looking for in the products, or what would we not be looking for in the products?
If you did, I'm not entirely sure what the product would be, but I feel like if you react the 2, you would get an entirely different product, not like what they're showing as the third one, compound 6.
Right. So that would be helpful in the sense that we would be showing that compound 6 is not formed, right? If we get something
Oh,
totally
yes.
different, right, then
Yeah.
that would be helpful. So that seems okay. What else? Oxidize compound 4 and compound 5 with IDO/H2O2 and identify the products, right? What does that mean? What does it mean, oxidize compound 4 and compound 5 and identify the products? So if we look back at this, right, what kind of reaction is this when we're going from compound 3 to these guys?
An oxidation reaction?
An oxidation reaction, right?
Yeah.
Because we obviously, easiest way to think about it is like we have more bonds to an oxygen, so it's
Yeah.
oxidized, right? So now they're saying, let's see here,
Oxidize it further.
oxidize these two further and identify the products. Would that make sense?
I feel like that would make sense as well.
Why would it make sense?
Because if you go any further, then there's a chance you wouldn't get compound 6.
Exactly, right. If you did do it and you did get compound 6, right? Then
Yeah.
you would be like, oh, okay, I was wrong, right? But if you
Yeah.
did it and you didn't see compound 6, boom, you're correct, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
I just proved that compound 6 is not formed from these guys, right? So B is also good. Then we have reduce pure compound 6 without added catalyst and identify the products. If we reduce, so reducing pure compound 6 is like there. So if they're, sorry, let me just write it out so it's not confusing. So if they're saying, if they're saying like, hey, how do you know that 4 and 5 aren't getting oxidized into 6, right? So a clever response might be, okay, well, I'll reduce 6 and show you that I can't get 4 or 5. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if you're saying like, oh, okay, let me just reverse it and then I'll show you it didn't come from 4 or 5. However, this says without added catalyst, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
Right. If in an experiment, we only want to be changing one thing at a time to give our best proof, right? We did everything exactly the same, and this is the only result. So it has to be from what we did, right? If you do that, always think about like these scientific questions as like you're having a fight for your life with somebody, and like you don't want to give them any possible reason to say that you're wrong, right? So if you do it without added catalyst, then they'll be like, okay, well, why didn't you add the catalyst, right? It could be different if you added the catalyst. If you add the catalyst, maybe you do get 4 and 5, right? So any hole that could be here, you want to get rid of it. So even though in theory, reducing 6 and going back seems fine, without added catalyst is a hole, right? It's a hole. It could be that when you add the catalyst, it still works, but that's not what this answer choice is saying. So we want to choose the strongest choice, right? So it wouldn't be C because it's not as identical of a match, basically. So the last one, conduct the reaction of compound 2 with H2O2 without added catalyst and identify the products. Conduct the reaction of compound 2 with H2O2 without, again, this is without added catalyst, right? So it's like, it's like, why would we do that? That's just a waste of time. So the without added catalyst here kind of knock out the C and D, and it forces us to choose between A and B. So now, between A and B, what do you want to go for and why?
I'm like torn between A and B, honestly.
That's exactly where they want you to be. They want you to be torn, right? So now the best way to not be so torn is to think about earnestly about each option and provide your best explanation for each option. This is exactly what you want to do, right? The 50-50 is the easy part. Now we're torn. Let's talk about it. Let's talk it through. What is your best reasoning for A and what is a potential flaw for A?
So for the issue with A is that you know how you're saying like without adding a catalyst is like kind of a waste of time.
Hmm.
It like eliminates the control sort of, I guess.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way about A though. It's also like a waste of time to like react 4 and 5 with each other. Because what if you get like other products? Like you're kind of assuming that there won't be like other many different products. Um, and that's the part that makes me uncomfortable, the assumption. And I don't think in this like question or test they would want us to like go off of assumptions, right? So just because of that, I would go with B.
Very, very well explained. Awesome. So you were torn, but then you thought about it a little deeper. And when you're torn between two things, you have to think about, like what can I eliminate based off of, right? And that's great.
Yeah.
They're not talking about a reaction between compound 4 and 5. They're asking sequentially from either, right? So it's
Mhm.
not if you do a reaction between 4 and 5, then your jerk PI is going to be like, well, I didn't ask about that. I said, what
Mhm.
about if it's either from 4, either from 5, right? So, so in that sense, this is a much stronger experiment because you're oxidizing these guys individually, right? You're oxidizing
Yeah.
4 with this and you're oxidizing 5 with this, and you're identifying the products. So great. I'm pretty sure that B is better than A. Yes, correct. B, oxidized compound 4. So let's see what their rationale was to eliminate A. Researchers can be sure that 6 is not 4 from 4 or 5. Enzymes are not used up, so any experiment that includes just compound 4 or 5 would determine if either is also a substrate. Having both compounds in solution with IDO adds unnecessary complexity to the interpretation of the experimental results. So that's how they explain that. Basically what you just said is how they explained why A is wrong.
Mhm.
Okay,
I
so
like
good.
how you
Mhm.
did that for number 3. Like you went back to the question and you were like, you drew on the keyword sequentially from either compound 4 or 5, and that's how you deduced that it would be B. I feel like my brain would not like think to jump to that, you know?
Mm. Well, I
Yeah.
think everything here needs to be focused on keywords because they're trying to
Mhm.
overwhelm you. They're always trying to overwhelm you with information, and 90% of the information you need is junk. Notice how we answered all of these questions without reading the passage. Did you guys realize that?
Yeah.
We did
Yeah.
not read the passage at all. We didn't. We don't need to. I don't need to understand this graph. It's not in the questions.
Right.
I don't need to understand this table. I don't need to read through all the details of this because they're not questioning me on it. So why would I waste my time? Right? They didn't
Yeah.
so that's why for Chem Phys, you need to be saving your time for calculations because you're going to get stuck. You are going to get stuck, right? It's not that like you identify okay, so step 1, you identify what they're asking for. Step 2, you figure out the equation you need. Step 3, you plug and chug. Step 4, you get the answer if you're lucky. If you make a mistake, you need to do it again, right? That can
Right.
happen. So you need to save your time and you need to look at the questions and you should be very targeted with your reading. You should be reading based on the keywords you look at. And so I don't think I did yet, but I'll upload the CP section that we did with Andrew last week because we did the same thing. We went through a very targeted uh tackling of the passage because the passage was ridiculous. The passage was like an insane um I don't even know what it was about, to tell you the truth. But we were able to answer the questions without reading by finding the keywords. Um, yes. Okay. So any questions? So you said something about like you wouldn't really look at the keywords or
Yeah,
questions.
I really liked you kind of like shortened the thinking process really efficiently. Like
Mhm.
you were able to kind of like cut it down to B by just knowing that like it's saying it's not formed sequentially from either compound or compound 4 or compound 5. Like I understand the question asks that, but then I wouldn't be able to think back to that part to like arrive at a final answer. I would my brain would still be going through like the content and jumping
I
through.
see what you're saying. So when you're
Yeah.
at this, I understand. So remember that content is going to help you. So okay, it's not a one size fits all thing, but
Mhm.
when in this kind of question, I hate saying this, but I feel like you can just tell that this is a conceptual question. Do you know
Mhm.
what I mean, or do I like?
No,
I don't
I
know.
understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So like sometimes you can tell that it's like it's a content check. This is a content check, right? Because they're asking a very discrete fact to 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 distinguish between two very discrete facts, right? Is it 400 or is it 1700? But this is much more like, hey, like evaluate these two situations. And what do you think? When it's an evaluation, it's not really about content. It's not really about content anymore. This is about experimental design. Like this is almost like philosophically, which is the stronger experiment? So I think you have to be in the right mindset. Like the content mindset is good to have for a content question, but when you're dealing with something like this, I would say look at the keywords, look at the relevant information, and then make a judgment, right? If that judgment takes a while, as long as you're getting to it one way, like I understand what you mean. Like you had talked about this a lot, and you had talked about like the various products that could form, and then you linked it back to this. And then my route was just shorter, right? But
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
You were
so
able to like jump.
I think uh
Maybe it's also just from like practice and like
I
habit,
think it
right?
is.
Like
I think
picking
it's
up.
very much from practice and habit. I think if you practice this approach of like questions first, because it's almost teaching. Okay. So the reason that I can do it is because that's the way I do it, and like it teaches my head like a scarcity mindset. Like I have a scarcity of
Yeah.
information, so every information that I have is very, very valuable. So I need to think about it as deeply as I can. So I save the time that I saved, like that I would have spent, that I would have wasted reading all this, I can save and then allows me to read the question very deeply and pay very much attention. So if I had highlighting here, I would have highlighted sequentially and I would have highlighted either because I know that these are like this is something that is relevant to the question, I feel.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, honestly. Like that approach, I feel like is the best one for this test, especially because like we don't have the time to like go through
Mhm.
like spend like so much time on one question. So I feel like just being able to pick up on the habit would be extremely efficient.
It is good. So for Chem Phys especially, I recommend this way. For
Yeah.
cars, I recommend the opposite way because the
Mm.
cars questions will just confuse you more if you try to like dig in the passage. Because did you are you in the WhatsApp group? Did you get the thing that I sent? Because we talked
Yeah,
about
I
this.
am.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I thought.
Okay, yeah. So I sent a picture that discussed
That was amazing, by the way. That was so amazing.
it was really helpful. That's so good. I'm so happy about that.
Super helpful.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna tell everybody that. Um Yeah, but the thing is, like the explanation here of read questions first and pick up units or equation does not really like explain why it works the way that we just did it, like over 20 minutes, right? Like it's not you wouldn't understand it unless you actually do it,
Yeah.
which is the hard part. I wish I could. I wish I could explain it better, but the
It's okay.
yeah, it's fine. So the thing I had sent here, I had for So actually, let me just explain these things, right? So just so you have so you can be practicing this way. Um,
Mhm.
how do I get this on my computer? I don't think I can because it's in WhatsApp. Do you have the thing I'm showing? Let me just
It's
let's
like it's the one you wrote out, right? Like the
yeah.
approach for each section.
Yeah, exactly. So okay. So tell you what. Okay, let's do. I think this is a good idea. Let's do each of these, right? Or as much as we can in the time that we have left, right?
Mhm.
And then next week we'll hard focus on like physics and chemistry and whatever passages
Sure.
that you are struggling with. Okay, so I want to do this one because, and we're going to go based off of like the approach, right? Um, annotations clear. Okay, so the approach, yes. So critical analysis and reasoning. So our approach here, read the passage first, highlight clues to the author's emotions, write or have in mind two things, the what, which is the content of the passage, and the how the author feels about the content. So we're going to read through this passage. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it yourself and try to do it on your own?
I think I'm better with like reading it myself.
Okay, I will just like, let me just paste the link in the chat. Don't scroll down to the questions. Just look at the
Okay.
read the question, read the passage. When you're done reading the passage, we will look at the questions together and try to
Okay.
think through it. Okay, so here is the thing, and then you can read the passage and just type in the chat when you're done. Oh, sorry to interrupt. The other thing I would like you to do, you can't highlight here, but just make a note or like write down like what you would highlight. And remember, what we're aiming to highlight are clues to the author's emotions, and then we'll compare.
Okay.
Okay, so before we go through the highlighting, let's just think about what is this passage about and how does the author feel about it?
I literally did not like this passage at all. These are the passages that I hate for the AAMC.
Good. So we're going to learn to love them
Gosh.
because they're good passages.
Yeah, I hate this. Like, I hate topics like this so much.
These like I don't like philosophical or like historical kind of like.
Yeah, the historical ones. Ugh,
Mhm. So
so
we're gonna
good.
we're gonna learn to love them. Don't worry.
Okay.
So first of all, like, what if anything did you? It might feel like getting blood from a rock, but what if anything did you get from this passage? Like, what is this dude talking about?
Yeah, I might sound really dense trying to explain it, but
That's okay.
and it's in like the simplest terms. Like I got they're obviously talking about this idea of the invisible hand,
Mhm.
and I think it's like an individualized type of like um thought that helps like the rest of the society. And
Mhm.
then they kind of follow up saying like, okay, but the issue with this is that it leads to the tragedy of the commons, which
Mhm.
I'm really not sure what that meant at all.
Mhm.
um and then I think the author continues to go like what happens with this, like personal gain is just maximized. And then you get more of like the author's like standpoint on this, especially with like the last few paragraphs, where he kind of or sorry, they kind of go like words like failure to do so will bring ruin on us all, so it
Mhm.
kind of gives like a negative connotation. Yeah, that's like
Okay.
all I got.
Good. So let's compress that into something that is very simple and easy to use, right? In a few words, like in a sentence, what is this passage about? Overall, like forgetting we're just thinking about the content. So for example, the content of the last passage was a reaction synthesis involving L-trip enzyme, right? A very simple sentence. Of course, you could go into much detail about compound 1 and compound 3 and whatever, right? In this passage, there's a lot of detail, but to boil it down into one thing, what do you think you could do? Or like, do you have an idea of what you could boil it down into?
Personal freedom.
Okay, so this is too boiled down. I want a sentence. I want a sentence of like, this passage is about da 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 da.
This passage is about like the pros and cons associated with like personal freedom.
Okay, I like that. Let's put this in there. The pros and cons of the, sorry, what did you say?
Pros and cons associated with personal freedom.
Associated with personal freedom. Okay. And so that's right now our what. Okay. And what is our how? Meaning the how the author feels. And you had mentioned like towards the end, he's like a little negative. So just in another quick sentence, like how, what would you describe as his how?
Sorry, the how is for how the author feels about it.
Mhm.
Okay. Free only to bring on the I think he's trying they're trying to say that if we don't remain if we don't pay like good attention to our personal freedom, then you cause like trouble as a collective for the collective, if that makes sense.
Collective here being society or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
good. So how do I move this? I think this is the best spot for it. Right here somewhere. Okay, so the reason that you had, so towards the end there, right, when I asked you how did the author feel about this, you had to go back and look at the passage, right, to kind of dig out what he was doing. If you have to do that, you didn't understand the passage well, because by the time you finish reading a passage, you should have an absolutely clear understanding of who this guy is and what he wants, right? So if you didn't understand the passage, what can you do, right? What you can do is take another crack at it, basically, right? You need to, if you cannot have this solidly down, then you're going to struggle in the questions, right? So actually reading it again and getting a solid thing here, right, is going to save you time struggling with the questions. And that's kind of what I meant by like, I think this is like a good, since you struggle with these passages, right? Later on, I want you to find a passage like this and dedicate like half an hour or an hour to trying to just tease out the logic rather than worrying about time, right? Because you read it pretty quickly, but you didn't understand it as deeply as you could have. So what we're going to do now is read through this and construct our own, and you're going to tell me as I read through it, you're going to tell me if you highlighted anything. Okay? Okay. So the wealth, another thing is, when I asked you like what it was about, you kind of went through paragraph by paragraph, right? Like you started with talking about the invisible hand and then this and then this. I used to do that and I found that it was very detrimental to my overall understanding. because each paragraph is kind of talking about its own thing, right? But overall, you need to have an overall synthesis of what it's actually about. You'll notice that the invisible hand actually has nothing to do with what they ultimately want you to take away as a message. But I'm going to go through that, and I'm just going to show you. So, the Wealth of Nations popularized the invisible hand, the idea that an individual who intends only personal gain is, as it were, led by an invisible hand to promote the public interest. Adam Smith did not assert that this principle was invariably true, but it contributed to a tendency of thought that has since remained dominant, preventing action based on rational analysis. The assumption that decisions, you highlighted which part?
The Adam Smith part.
Adam Smith did not assert that this principle was invariably true, but it contributed to this whole thing?
Yeah.
Why did you highlight this?
Because I just thought that the fact that they're bringing up Adam Smith and the fact that he didn't really assert that this principle was true, but even because even though he didn't assert it was true, it was still widely like popular. So I thought maybe there would be a question that comes up about this later.
What does this tell you about the author?
Nothing really.
Nothing. You shouldn't highlight it.
No, oh, because it doesn't say something about the author.
Because it doesn't say something about the author. The thing is, facts and stuff, like if they ask you a question about Adam Smith, you will be able to find it because just by skimming, you're skimming for the word Adam Smith, and you should be able to find it, right? If they ask you what the author is thinking, it's not going to be just like right there as Adam Smith would be. So it's going to be much harder for you to find it when you're skimming through the passage.
Right.
So that's why when you're highlighting, you want to be, again, scarcity, right? You want to be very, very deliberate with your highlighting. And you want to be like, only highlight something if it tells you, if it's like a clue towards the author. Remember, we talked about like, thinking that like the author is a criminal and you're trying to like create a profile, right? Any stray clue, any sort of word choice that you're like, ooh, this tells me a little bit about you. I'm putting the puzzle together. So yes, this could come up in a question. You're not wrong, right? It could come up in a question, but the purpose of highlighting is not this could come up in a question. The purpose of highlighting, at least for cars, at least with the strategy that we're talking about, is to gain a more comprehensive idea of the author. Okay. So the assumption that decisions reached individually will collectively be the best decisions for society as a whole. If this assumption is correct, it justifies the continuance of the US policy of laissez-faire in many issues affecting business, the environment, and the family. If it is not correct, US citizens need to re-examine their individual freedoms to see which are defensible. You highlighted this part, right? If it is not correct, okay. In this part, in this paragraph, I would have not highlighted anything, or I would have highlighted this part, that this, if it is not correct, and if this assumption is correct. What does this part tell you about the author?
Yeah, this one I feel like is introducing author's opinion by saying like, oh, if it is correct, then this happens. But then it even says if it's not correct, then US citizens need to re-examine their individual freedom. So saying need to suggests that it's the author's input here.
I agree, yes. Right now, how do you feel like the author's standpoint is on this issue? Where is he?
I feel like the author's, I can't really tell what the author's standpoint is, but I feel like I can tell that the author is setting the stage up to kind of discuss both of them, like if it is correct and if it's not correct.
Good. You said you can't really tell where he is, right?
Yeah.
Because he's playing a neutral position. If it's correct, if it's not correct, he's equally giving you both sides, like you're saying, right? So this is valuable for us to know, because when an author starts off like this, when they start off neutral, where they're like, let me show you both sides of the conversation, oftentimes in the middle, they hit you with a swerve and they're like, that's why we need to do this.
Right.
Because he's setting up the stage before he He's giving you all the info. Academics love to do this, right? They like to
Mhm.
explain the whole situation, and then they like to hit you with, this is my position, this is why I'm correct. Because I've given you all the information. They're trying to win you over on the basis of like, they have the better info, I guess. So this overall in this whole first paragraph, this is valuable, and this is only valuable such that it tells you that the author is somebody who is not taking a stance yet, but he's just
Mhm.
showing you everything equally. Yes. Let me know when we're ready to go next.
I'm good. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I'm ready. Yeah.
Okay. The rebuttal to the invisible hand theory could be called the tragedy of the commons. Even though this is in parentheses, this is in like quotes, I wouldn't highlight this still. Even though it's probably going to be important, like again, I'm saving my highlights to be as high value as possible. Any highlight I see is a clue for me, right? So picture a pasture open to all. It can be expected that each herder will try to keep as many cattle as possible on this commons. Such an arrangement may work reasonably well for centuries because tribal wars, poaching, and disease keep the numbers of both human and beast far below the carrying capacity of the land. Finally, however, comes the day of reckoning. That is, the day on which the long-desired goal of social stability becomes a reality. At this point, the inherent logic of the commons remorselessly generates tragedy. Did you highlight anything here? And if you didn't, what would you highlight now?
What I would highlight is the last two sentences of this paragraph again. Because again, it's the transitions finally, however.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I would highlight that.
Good. You're noticing where it's important. I would push you even further. Rather than highlighting entire sentences, I want you to highlight only specific phrases, specific word choices.
Mhm.
So which of these in this, let's start with this sentence. What is the most high impact word in this sentence that tells you like, oh, wow, this dude is like, like, wow, he feels a kind of way about this. However is good. I agree with that. However is good because he is transitioning. So however is perfectly valid to highlight. There's something else here that I feel like is very important.
Comes the day of, is it reckoning?
I think it's the day of reckoning, because if you describe something as the day of reckoning, right, it's very impactful.
Yeah.
He doesn't just say it's bad. He just says the day of reckoning, the day of judgment. What is the day of judgment?
Yeah, I guess you're right, because he's deliberately choosing to use like a very strong descriptor for
Correct.
it. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Any word choice is super important, right? The day of reckoning. What does he describe as the day of reckoning?
The day he's describing the day of reckoning as when he firstly begins by talking about the arrangement, but he's saying that arrangement might be good for some time, but then you finally have to deal with like the alarming situation.
What is the alarming situation? What does he say is the alarming situation? The day of what?
No idea.
Right here. Read after the day of reckoning.
Like literally the day on which the long desired goal of social stability becomes a reality.
Is social stability becoming a reality a bad thing?
No.
In whose opinion? In whose opinion?
In mine, it's not a bad thing, but in his, it's a bad thing.
It's a bad thing, and that's why this sentence is incredibly important, because it's like a whoa. Why do you think social stability is bad? Why does he think social stability is so bad that he describes it as a day of reckoning? So, so what I'm trying to get across is that things like this for me is like a swerve when I see it, because I'm like, huh? Like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, why would you think that's bad? Right? And now he's going to start trying to explain his point, right? So when you see something, to me, like this is like a flash or something. Like I don't really know how to describe it, but it's like, I'm like, you just said something so weird. Like, what do you mean by that? But you would and the reason that this comes across so weird is because he calls it a day of reckoning, right? In this sentence, what is very useful towards his emotions.
The at this point part,
What about at this point?
because I feel like that's him putting in his input into it again.
What is
When
his
he
input?
says like at this point, the
Mhm.
logic of the commons, he goes back to the commons by saying like the negative consequence of it.
Does at this point talk, is that negative? Where is the negativeness in the sentence?
The last three words, I guess.
The last three
Remorsely.
words. Yes.
Remorselessly. Yeah.
Remorselessly generates tragedy. They're saying like remorselessly means like without any hesitance, right? Like this is your fault. Like I have no
Mhm.
remorse. You did this to yourself. This is again a clue to how he feels, right? If it's
Yeah.
remorselessly generating tragedy, then it's like it's your fault. It's a day of reckoning, right? Notice how day of reckoning and remorselessly lines up, because the day of reckoning is like, you know, you're getting the punishment you deserve, right? In the biblical sense. And he's saying remorselessly generates tragedy. So now, since he's using these strong word choices, we're thinking about, why does this dude feel so strongly about what? What is he actually talking about? Ultimately, he's talking about the tragedy of the commons, because
Mhm.
all of this was him explaining the situation, right? But then he's saying, this starts with him describing the tragedy of the commons. So overall, we're trying to get his feelings, right? If we understand his feelings, the understanding of the content comes from that.
Right.
Because if we notice where he's being the most empathetic or the most angry or the most whatever, it naturally makes us want to understand like, dude, why are you so heated? Like, what's going on? Right?
Yeah.
Like, so at this point, since he's almost cursing them as like sinners, like the
Yeah.
day of reckoning will be upon you for like doing the tragedy of the commons. I'm like, at this point, I'm like, what's wrong with this man? Like, I want to find out what's your deal. So,
Yeah.
any questions about I don't know, any questions?
Oh my god, this passage is so hard. In general, this passage is scary.
it's I think, yeah, you're only gonna get over that by doing more of these, and by doing them in the way that we talked about, like going very slowly. And because if you can't do it if you can't do it well fast, then you need to start doing it well slowly, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I
So-
guess like my confusion comes because like I did like the other I think it's the section bank, which I heard was like a lot harder. And I was getting like a 70% for the car section on the section bank. And I was told that's like still somewhat decent for that.
Cars has a section bank?
I think it's either the OG or the section bank is like all the different subjects in one, I think.
I don't think there's a car
Let me
section
see.
bank. I think there's Q packs.
Yeah, there's Q packs, but then there's cars is in another one too. I'm not sure if it's the OG or the section bank. Wait, I'm looking right now.
Yeah, let me see. Oh, I don't have it anymore. MCAT prep. MCAT official prep hub.
So I think it's the MCAT official prep online practice questions from the official guide. So the OG. And it's like 30, 30, 30, 30.
These are easier.
Oh gosh.
These are easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
No
this
wonder
one
I was
now.
doing like so much better on those.
Yeah, yeah. These are easier. I remember these.
Yeah.
I remember these. Yeah. The truly representative one is the question pack, the question packs, and the CARS diagnostic tool is very weird. Like it came out like very recently, and like I don't like I think it's good because there's like explanations, but some of those passages I was like, huh? Like I would never it's really weird. But anyways,
I mean, like they're easier because I feel
Yeah.
like those are a little easier than like what we're doing right now too.
They are a little easier. I think
Yeah.
that this level of cars passage is like the worst that you could expect on the MCAT, and you should expect at least like half of them to be at this level. That's what
Yeah,
I'll
it's
say.
literally making me kind of panic because I'm like, wait, this isn't aligned with my card scores right now.
Yes. So don't panic because you
Yeah.
have time. All you
Yeah.
need to do is get acclimated to it, right? Your cars, if your
Yeah.
car scores are good, that means you're good on the lighter ones, right? And you just need to tackle the heavier ones. And it
Mhm.
comes with time. So and it's all obviously it's a lot better than like going in and being like, oh my god, all these passages are really
For
hard,
sure.
right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So you want the panic now rather than later.
Yeah.
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 So, let's keep going. So,
Okay.
as a rational being, each herder seeks to maximize personal gain. More or less consciously, the individual asks, what is the utility to me of adding one more animal to my herd? Since the herder would receive all the proceeds from the sale of the additional animal, the positive component of this utility is nearly +1. The negative component is a function of the overgrazing caused by an additional animal. Since the effects of overgrazing are shared by all the herders, the negative utility for any particular decision maker is some fraction of -1. This is him in a very weird, like quantitative way, saying like any person. Okay, actually, let me talk about the next part. Adding the also, would you highlight anything here?
No, I didn't highlight anything
It's
there.
not because this is just exposition basically.
Yeah.
Adding the component utilities, the rational herder concludes that the only sensible course is to add another animal to his or her herd, and another, and another. This conclusion is reached by every rational herder who shares the commons. All are locked into a system that compels each to increase his or her gain without limit in a world that is limited. Ruin is the destination towards which all rush, and each pursuing the right to use a public resource. The problem is that a commons, if justifiable at all, is justifiable only under conditions of low population density. As the human population has increased, the commons concept has had to be abandoned in one aspect of another after another. What do you get out of this?
This passage makes so much more sense as you're reading it like slowly. Like it finally has meaning versus when I read it like, yeah, it didn't have any meaning.
That's why we're talking about ignoring the timing, ignoring feeling the need to go fast, and because you're saving time. It might feel like, oh, I'm going too slow. This is bad. No, you're going to save so much time on the questions. You'll be surprised. You'll be like, wait, these questions all make sense now because I actually understood the passage, right?
Yeah.
I know it doesn't feel that way right now. I know it feels weird to like spend like 5 or 6 minutes on the passage, but in the long run, that's what's going to help you the most because eventually you're going to shave that 5 minutes down to like maybe 4 minutes 30 seconds and then to 4 minutes, but you have to start slow.
Yeah, like before I thought like what the hell is he talking about when he keeps saying commons? I thought it was like a idea of some sort, but it's a literal physical area that he was just talking about these herders are sharing.
Yes, and notice how our what here, the pros and cons associated with personal freedom, is not actually what this passage is about.
Yeah, it's not.
That's why I made you write it out because this is how you improve at cars. When you write this out and then have to like tackle your logic and be like, yo, wait, what was it talking about? Like that's not right. And then and that's literally how you improve because I don't know why it works, but it literally does work. Like you become better at hashing it out. So good. It's good. I'm glad that like you're having that epiphany of like, wait, like I didn't understand it before. Good. Okay, awesome. So he talked about he gave like a hypothetical example, right? He was like, okay, imagine that there's this commons, right? And like all these sheep herders are like using it. Well, what's gonna happen, right? And what can we highlight? Not in this paragraph, but in this paragraph. What do we see as like again him talking about how negative it is that because we already have like a little seed in our mind of like how the author feels, right? We already highlighted. I wish I could highlight here, but like remember we had highlighted Day of Reckoning and remorselessly, right? So what here is like similarly negative, that like him is like, that he's like, oh, like I understand how he's feeling about this.
Like he says, ruin is the destination towards which all rush. And then following
Excellent.
that, he says the problem is that. Yeah.
Yes, good. So ruin is the destination. That's good. He's saying ruin. Ruin is coming from you, not like
Yeah.
a light like a light, problem. Ruin. You're going to be ruined, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that it comments if justifiable at all. I would also highlight this. I feel like this is a little bit you might not see this yet, but what I'm saying, the reason that I would highlight this is he's saying if justifiable at all is an
Yeah.
implication that he's not so sure that it is justifiable.
Mhm.
He's like Loki saying is like, it's like if I said like,
It's questionable.
sorry,
He's saying it's like questionable.
it's questionable. Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I'd love to go to that party, if I could make it.
Yeah.
Do you know that? That's like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that person
yeah.
saying like, I'm not really into that. I'm not really actually like wanting to go to that party. Like, I'm just like subtly like on the down low saying like, yeah, if I can make it, if I can clear up some time.
Yeah.
So he's like, if justifiable at all, like if at all, like he's like, he's kind of subtly saying like, I'm not sure if it's actually justifiable, but if you had to, it would only be under this situation, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
And
yeah.
and finally, the last thing I would say is has had to be abandoned. This is finally him, like he's no longer teasing, right? He's just saying like, this is what I believe. As the human
Right.
population has increased, we have to abandon the commons concept. Boom, he told you. He told you what you want to hear. Now, if the question had said, tell me what the author believes, you would have an incredibly hard time finding this sentence because it doesn't say anywhere like what I believe is that this, right? That's why you need to highlight the way that I've explained. Has had to be abandoned. Anytime he says has had, that's incredibly powerful language. We must do this. We need to do this. Anything strong, anything like stronger than like a mild T, like you're gonna highlight basically. Okay. Any questions about this paragraph? This so far is like the
Nope.
most impactful paragraph so far.
Yeah.
towards
It
his.
finally like clicked meaning wise in me from that paragraph.
Excellent. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Good. All right. So the social arrangements that would produce, and again, the way that I'm reading, like I'm reading as if I'm reading to a class, which is what it is, right? If if this helps you, do it that way. Pretend that you're reading to somebody. You had already said like it helps you best when you explain to somebody. Read this
Yeah.
as if you're explaining it to like your friend or something. And I think that will help you with your own, even again, don't worry about the timing right now. Trust me, don't worry about the timing. Go through this with the focus on comprehension. Okay. So the social arrangements that would produce responsibility in the scenario create coercion. The only kind of coercion I recommend is mutual coercion, agreed to by a majority of those affected. Compulsory taxes are acceptable because a system of voluntary contributions would favor the conscienceless. A society institutes and grumblingly supports taxes and other coercive devices to escape the horror of the commons. What do we highlight here?
The only kind of coercion I recommend.
Wonderful,
is
right? He
mutual
just straight up says,
coercion.
I
Yeah.
recommend, right? We definitely
Yeah.
highlight the I recommend part, just so you know, like, oh, he's giving an explicit advocacy for something here. And what else could we highlight here? I think that you hit on the most important one. There's also some like little ones that you could highlight. Grumbly, yes, grumblingly, right? But the only thing to be careful here is that he's saying it's not him saying he's grumbling. He's saying a society is grumbling about it. But it's still like spicy enough that like you might want to highlight because it's an interesting word choice, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I would take is compulsory taxes are acceptable. This is
Oh,
him
yes.
saying,
Yes.
I accept this. I believe in this. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, why? Because a system of voluntary contribution would favor the conscienceless. What does he mean by that? Instead of taxes, if we had voluntary contributions, what is he saying would happen?
He's saying
That's okay. Take your time.
compulsory is better. A system would favor Oh, like people who don't want to give. If it was voluntary, then people who like don't care just wouldn't give. But if it's mandatory, then everyone has to give, right?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Good.
Yeah.
So, and devices to escape the horror of the comment. The last thing I might choose is horror, because again, it's just a nice spicy word, right? It's a punchy word. It's like you instead of calling it the tragedy, he's calling it the horror now, right? Like,
Mhm.
he's using all these big like words to describe it. So
Mhm.
now, finally, towards the end, every new enclosure of the commons involves the infringement of somebody's personal freedom. But what does freedom mean? Those subject to the logic of the commons are free only to bring on universal ruin. Again, obviously, we're going to highlight this. Once they acknowledge the logic of mutual coercion, they become free to pursue other goals. We must now recognize the necessity of abandoning the commons. Again, he's hitting us with what he said, right? So luckily, he gave it to us twice. Before he said the commons concept has had to be abandoned, and now again he's saying the necessity of abandoning the commons assumption in our reproduction. Failure to do so will bring ruin on us all. So,
Okay.
Maria, what is this passage
Wow.
about? What
I
is
was
this passage
so
about?
off.
Yep.
It's literally just about commons and how he thinks that people are so like stuck on this idea of commons, but it's such a high. It's better for low density populations, but if you have a high density populations and population and you focus on the commons, then you inevitably bring ruins to like everyone as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So he's basically saying that we need to kind of like abandon the idea of the commons and focus on mutual coercion, as he says now.
Look how different that is from before.
So
so good. So notice how well these flow. When I asked you last time, how does he feel about this? You were very like, oh, like you were pretty wishy-washy because you didn't know,
yeah,
right? Because you also
yeah,
didn't understand the passage, right? But
yeah,
now you just explained everything thoroughly. You were like, oh, it's obviously about the tragedy of commons and all these things. You talked about abandoning it because he hated it, blah, blah, blah. And the stuff that we highlighted helps us understand how angry he is about the situation, or like how much he hates like the people. Well, he does like he's just saying like you get everything you deserve, like if you do this, right? Because we need to abandon this situation. It's terrible, right? So
yeah,
good. All right. So ready for the questions.
yeah.
And
I am.
you'll be surprised at how different the questions feel. Well, we should have looked at them we probably should have looked at them before we did this.
Oh,
But
your tip is to look over the questions
no,
prior
no,
to
no, no,
like.
no, 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 no. What I meant was like we should have looked at the questions in between doing this before and after, just so you could have seen like how confusing the questions would be, and now how less
Oh,
confusing
I
they are.
see.
Yes.
Okay, okay,
For cars, you do not read the questions before.
got it.
You absolutely do this what and how first, because now the questions are going to be so nice. Here we go.
Okay.
According to the passage, the decisive factor in determining whether someone's action should be subject to coercion is whether the actions, A, are determined solely by self-interest, B, affect collectively held resources, C, degrade the natural environment, D, are commonly considered immoral. Which of these two choices are absolutely trash and have nothing to do with anything that we talked about?
C and D.
Exactly. We've never once talked about the environment. We never talked about
Yeah.
immoral. They're hoping that because he brought up that nature pasture thing, they're hoping that you're going to think like, oh, this is about the environment. It's obviously not, right? Now we have our torn decision between A and B, right?
Yeah.
Is the passage more focused on people's self-interest? Like so in this case, right, we need to think about coercion, right? Again, we're doing the keyword strategy, right? Subject to coercion. What does he say needs to be subject to coercion, right? So we look at the only kind of coercion I recommend is mutual coercion, agreed to by a majority of those affected. The social arrangements that would produce responsibility in this scenario create coercion. So between these two, is he talking about actions determined solely by self-interest or actions that affect collectively held resources? When thinking in relation to the entire passage, what is the main focus of the passage?
Definitely B, because he keeps mentioning universal ruin.
Excellent, right? Because he's talking
Yeah.
about the tragedy of the commons and the tragedy. So good. So let's just look at yeah, go ahead. Give your explanation
My
for why
God,
it's
that's
B.
such a long explanation.
Yes.
Mine was okay. So he said that answer choice B says affect collectively held resources,
Mhm.
and throughout the entire passage when we reread it, he did keep bringing up like universal ruin, and I got the idea that it affects everyone.
Yes, it affects everyone.
Yeah, so that's why I went with answer choice B.
Good. What could you say is against answer choice A? This is also very helpful. Getting the right choice is good. Why is the wrong choice wrong?
So the question says decisive factor in determining whether someone's action should be subjected to coercion. So it never says that coercion. Well, it's in the passage. It literally says that it's a line you read that the only kind of coercion I recommend is mutual coercion agreed to a majority of those affected. And it doesn't say anything about self-interest only, although he does talk about like people, adding more to the commons for their personal gain. But this is different from like what he's saying in that line.
Good. Excellent. Yeah, that's basically exactly how I would describe it. So let's go through our rationale and see a little bit about how they talk about it. So the passage argument is not that all actions determined by self-interest should be regulated. Only those actions in which the gain of one represents a loss to all and the voluntary restraint is unlikely. Where did we talk about voluntary restraint is unlikely? Right here with consciencelessness. Compulsory tasks are acceptable because the system of voluntary contributions would favor the conscienceless. Yeah. So that's another clue towards A being wrong, because he's not saying that we should coerce people if they're acting selfishly. That's not actually what he's arguing against. He's saying we should, if they're acting selfishly and it hurts everybody, right? Then we all hit ruin. Then we hit universal ruin. But he's not actually arguing specifically against selfishness itself, right? He doesn't actually say that. He doesn't say that, oh, the solution is nobody should be selfish and nobody should add another animal to their herd, right? So that's why this is the decision that they're forcing you to be torn about, and these are the obvious ones that are deleted. So only those actions in which the gain of one represents loss to all and voluntary restraint is unlikely. Thus option A is incorrect. Implicitly, coercion is needed to produce responsibility in circumstances to which the parable of the common applies, i.e. resources are held collectively so that self-interest compels each to increase his or her gain without limit in a world that is limited. Thus, option B is correct. I feel like this explanation is very wordy and like confusing. I feel like we understood it well already.
Yeah.
That's why I do this like small thing, because when they try to explain it, like they're explaining it as if like you didn't understand it at all. So they're explaining from very scratch, but like it's fine, whatever. Yeah, you have the link if you
got
want
it from your explanation better. So
okay, good. So let's keep moving. Let's keep it pushing. Okay, so not answer. Okay, the passage argument suggests that national parks might benefit from 1. The restriction of recreational use by means of fees. 2. The selling of the facilities to private investors. 3. The opening of additional facilities to the public. What do we think about number 1? How does the author think about number 1? Would he support the restriction of recreational use of parks through fees?
So with number 1, I don't know why I feel like it sounds so extreme when he uses the word restriction in number 1. But then again, in the passage, they did bring up compulsory taxes. So then
Good.
that's what I see the alignment. So one actually does feel right because of that.
Good. Excellent. You matched the vibe of the author, right? He said it's
Yeah.
necessity. We have to do it, right? So
Yeah.
if the so excellent. You were at first you were like, not sure, but you had the author's like vibe in mind. So excellent. Good. One
Yeah.
does match up. The restriction, it's hardcore, but the author is hardcore. The
Yeah.
restriction of recreational use by the means of fees. This aligns perfectly with the tax discussion, right?
Right.
And restricting the use of the commons is what he wants. He's saying we need to do that. Good. Two, the selling of the facility. Oh, so the other thing is, right? These are A, B, C, D. Since we know that one is correct, we know that we need to choose an option with one, right?
Right.
So only A and C. We've eliminated B and D. So actually, the only thing we also need to look over is two. If we want to save a lot of time, we can do that. If you don't feel comfortable with it on the test, you can flag it and come back later and be like, "Oh, I'll take a look at three if I have extra time."
Right.
Okay. So now we have to look at two, right? The selling of and also if you look at three, it's very obviously wrong. The opening of additional facilities to the public. This is absolutely 100% opposite of what the author wants.
Right.
Good. The selling of the facilities to private investors. Okay, this is a little tricky. How would the author feel about the selling of the commons to private investors?
I don't really like that choice at all. He because throughout the passage he talks about like the somewhat like greed or selfishness, and he didn't really support the idea of like, one person having it all, or like for their
You're talking
own
about this
benefit.
part, right? Like where like everybody's like going for their own benefit.
Yeah, exactly. That's why two feels wrong.
I agree. There's also something else here that is maybe a jump, but no, it's not a jump actually, because here he says, if this assumption is correct, it justifies the continuance of the U.S. policy of laissez-faire in many issues affecting business. Have you ever heard of laissez-faire? It's usually referred to as laissez-faire.
I've definitely heard of it, but I totally didn't know what it meant.
So laissez-faire capitalism, the right to do your own business. Yes. So laissez-faire capitalism is usually used as like a pejorative, as like it's unlimited capitalism. It's late stage capitalism, right? It's like you can do whatever you want. So he's saying here is like, oh, if that assumption is correct, then sure, then the US is justified to be going hard on capitalism. But later on, he talks about how it's not justified, right? He's like, no, this is actually garbage. We need to stop, right?
Right.
So that is another route that you could take to understanding that two is wrong. But you're correct. Oh, you're already correct. I just wanted to show you another like potential keyword.
Right.
Good. So here the only option is one, or A, right? And so correct. Answer is A, one only. So we knew obviously 3 was wrong. Let's dig into why 2 is wrong. According to the passage, the solution to the problem of overuse is not to enlarge the commons, but to abandon the commons concept. Oh, that's for 3, right? Obviously. If resources to which the commons analogy currently applied became concessions for private investors, charges in their use by the public might result. However, since the passage provides no analysis of the decision-making process involved in the wish of private owners to maximize personal gain, it does not justify a conclusion about the effects on parklands of privatization. So essentially, they're saying the author didn't give enough support for this idea, right? And we also had the fact that like he talks a little bit about the dangers of like this, but he doesn't go so far as to condemn it, right? So overall, this is one of those things where it's like there's just not enough to say. Like it's slightly not enough / slightly negative. That's how I would kind of describe the author's idea of this, because I don't have like a strong thing that I can point to, because ultimately it's not actually really straightly discussed, but there's not enough there to say that this is correct, right?
Right.
Okay, so good. So we got A. And now let's go to our very last one. Some communities with expanding populations have for centuries managed commonly held land. An appropriate clarification of the passage would be the stipulation that the author's argument applies only to A, the future, B, unregulated resources, C, conditions of social instability, D, resources that are not managed locally. There are two here which are obviously wrong because they blatantly contradict the passage. Which of them do you think blatantly contradict?
Oh, this is difficult.
Hmm.
I'm honestly not sure about this one.
So let's go back. So this question is saying, like, hey, what if there was a situation where the author was wrong? Because
Yeah.
there is a situation with expanding populations, and they're doing it good. So what is the clarification that the author could make? Okay, so let's go back to the passage and see what can we blatantly get rid of. The first thing that I want to blatantly get rid of, the thing that I remember is what I asked you to remember. Remember, this is so good because I asked you to highlight Day of Reckoning, right?
Yeah.
And I said there was something really weird here, right? That is the day on which the long desired goal of social stability becomes a reality, right? And I was like, that's weird. Why would you think social stability is a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
One of the options here is saying conditions of social instability. This is
So no, that would be out. Okay.
that would be
because-
out. That would be
yeah.
totally out. It's the opposite of what the author is talking about.
Yeah.
Good. So this is one it's a hard contradiction to find, right? If you didn't pick up on it, like it would be hard. But if we had our highlighting and we looked around a little bit towards like, what does the author feel? What does the author feel? We could be able to find it. So this is one. A, the future. I think A, the future is wrong because he says another part that we highlighted. He says something about we needed to abandon it. As the human population has increased, the commons concept has had to be abandoned.
Oh, wow. That
Yes.
already signifies past. Okay.
Correct. That's why you need to be very, very, very judicious with your highlight. You need to choose the absolute. Pretend like your highlighter is running out of ink and you can't just highlight willy-nilly. Honestly, pretend like you can only highlight like maybe 5 or 6 words. And that is going to force you to choose the absolute most high impact things that are going to show up in the questions. Notice how
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I totally would not have picked up on that, honestly.
Notice how there's absolutely nothing about Adam Smith.
Yeah.
so yeah, I think the reason that you did that is because this is a very common like SAT style question or like state test questions. I think that's why this test is, this part of the test is very, very hard for people who don't know how to prepare for it because you're preparing for like a different test. Because those tests do say like, what did Adam Smith think about this thing, right? Or like refer to paragraph 4. What does this sentence mean or whatever, right? It's like, unfortunately, there's not enough good explanation for this section. And that's why it's consistently like the lowest ranking one that people do on. Because you really need your strategy needs to be totally different, totally novel, compared to what you've been doing.
I was kind of thinking like the answer would be the future because he keeps saying like the day of reckoning will come or something, but I guess I fell for their trap
a little bit. So now we've deleted A and we've deleted C. We've got B, unregulated resources, and D, resources that are not managed locally. Which one flows better with the passage?
I would go with B.
You would go with which one?
Unregulated resources.
Good, because that's what the topic is about.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
he doesn't really mention anything locally.
He never mentioned anything about local management or the impact of local management. Do you see how much different it becomes when you understand exactly what the author is talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a big difference.
It
I
makes a
probably
huge
would have
difference.
gotten like 1, 2, and 3 wrong if I didn't like read over the passage and really
I'm willing to
understand it.
bet that you would have.
Yeah.
TBH. So
Yeah.
yeah, because like right now, if we look at these questions through the lens of our initial what and how, it doesn't help us at all. Because these questions are not about personal freedom at all. They're about the
Mhm.
tragedy of the commons, and his opinion is we need to move on. We can't do this anymore. So for cars specifically, the thing is, once you did this, you understood it and you answered all the questions properly, right? So there's not a reason to panic, okay? Because you are capable of doing it. You just haven't been doing it. So what you need
Mhm.
to be doing is just practicing this
Yeah.
for the timing aspect, right? Like I understand that you're panicking about the timing aspect. You need to practice this. You need to walk before you can run. And maybe in the
Right.
beginning you even need to crawl, okay? So
Yeah.
when you see when you see these passages, right, and they look scary, I want you to think about the fact that this is a great chance for you to practice this passage so that you're ready for the exam. And it's not scary, it's an opportunity. Like you're blessed to run into this passage before you have to see it on the exam.
For
And
real.
yes,
Seriously.
and so you're going to take your time. You're going to forget about the timer. You're going to toss the timer in the trash. You're going to take your time. You're going to understand it as absolutely best as you possibly can. You're going to move on to the questions when you feel like, if somebody offered me $1 million to tell them this correctly, I could do it. That's the level of confidence you want to have when you're done reading the passage. Then you do the questions, and you were able to do the questions, right? You're gonna do the
Yeah.
same way that we did. We strike out the two that are dumb really quickly, and then we do our debate over the two difficult ones, and that's it.
I guess like since I'm like already a month out, I know you said I should go slow, try to crawl before I walk if I feel like I'm like having a trouble understanding the passage.
Mhm.
But do you have any other suggestions? Like, do you think I should be doing like a lot of these every single day, the next few days, or
I don't think you need to be doing a lot. I think what I was doing was like doing two passages every day, no matter what.
uh-huh.
And right, so so specifically what I think you should be doing is, since you're struggling with like these like art history style or whatever passage style, right? Just look for
Mhm.
something that looks like this. There's a bunch of them in like the Picasso passage in the question pack, right? Like what
Oh
I'm
my
talking about.
gosh.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want you to go back to the Picasso passage. When did you do it?
Sorry.
When did you do the Picasso passage?
I did that like a few months ago.
Good. So it's been long enough. Go back to the
Yeah.
Picasso passage and tackle it as if you have an hour to do it and see if you can understand it fully. This is
Yeah.
something that's really going to help you. The other thing that you need to be doing is writing down the what and making it flow perfectly into the how. So
Uh-huh.
it needs to be, this is what the author's talking about. This is exactly how he feels about it. And now I have what I need to answer every question. Because that's ultimately, once you eliminate the two dumb ones, it's literally just affect collectively held resources. Yeah, that's exactly what he's talking about. Oh,
Mhm.
restriction of recreational use of the resources. Yeah, that's exactly what he's talking about. Oh, unregulated resources. That's exactly what he's talking about.
Right.
So that's the way you kind of so very specifically, again, I'm going to tell you to do maybe one or two of these a day.
Mhm.
In the beginning, like maybe this week, take your time, right? Take your time, go through it, and you're going to work out any kinks with your comprehension. You're going to work out your kinks with your comprehension, and then week by week, you start focusing on like speeding up a little bit. It's going to be slow at
Mhm.
first because you're changing completely how you highlight.
Right.
So it's going to be a little bit tricky at first. So in the beginning, don't time yourself. Just go through it as like I'm highlighting for the things that are clues to the author's emotions. I'm writing out a perfect Very, very short, very, very succinct. What? I'm writing how the author feels about the what, and then I'm answering my questions. And you do
Okay.
that for a week, and I guarantee you're going to see humongous results.
Okay. And you're saying like this would be like one of the harder passages we would come across on the exam, right?
I definitely think that this is like, yes, because the reason that this is a harder passage is because the author is not really, he's kind of playing his hand close to this chest. What that means is that like at the very beginning, he kind of overwhelms you with like background. And then, and even this is all background. Even this is like, yo, imagine it's like if you've ever watched The Simpsons, there's like a bit where like Grandpa Simpson is like, he tells you, he's like, we would waste our time telling stories that don't go anywhere. Like the time I went to Shelbyville with an onion on my belt, which was the style at the time. So I had to go to Morganville to buy a red onion because they didn't have white onions. And it's just like, and he just goes into like a bit that goes nowhere, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
it's all of this is him just like setting up background all until this part, right?
Yeah.
So this is hard because you need to be paying attention and keeping your eyes peeled until he gives it away. So I think these are a little harder, yeah, because you need to be like, I like, for me, like I find that like getting angry at the author helps. I'm like, dude, stop, just tell me what you want. I find that for some
That's
reason,
funny.
yeah, for some reason, like I make a game out of it. I'm like, okay, all right, we get it, dude. All right, wrap it up. Okay, stop stalling.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, here it is. All right, thank you. Like, was that so hard? I don't know. I try to have like a conversation with the author and yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, I feel like this one would also be hard if like you didn't pick up on like the weird language he's using. He basically
Yes.
talks about like, social stability being like bad, but normally when we're using our opinion, we would think like that's good.
Yes.
So I think if you don't pick up on that, then it
Yeah,
also, like,
that's a very common trick. So like the thing, so it
yeah.
was good that you immediately picked up, oh, social instability is the opposite, right?
Uh-huh.
Because what they want you to do is look at social instability here and be like, oh yeah, that's bad, right?
Mhm.
But in the context of this situation, the author thinks that it's good
Mhm.
because it prevents the tragedy of the commons. So
Right.
it's like everything got flipped. Like the relationships here got flipped, and you really need
Yep.
to forget about your own. You really need to. It's hard. You need to forget about your own assumptions and your own. You just need to embody the author as like channel the author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. This helped me so much.
Awesome. Good to hear. Good to hear.
Yeah.
So oh, we're a little over time. Okay, that's fine. We're going to uh I have things to do. So I really want to go over the other ones with you though. I feel like it'll be very helpful too. Um hmm. Hmm, 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 hmm.
I'm fine with doing like what you are comfortable with.
I don't want to oh, let me say wait, let me just stop the recording. Um wait, that's stop share. That's not stop recording.